The daughter of one of Latin America's most controversial leaders is set to become Peru's next president. Keiko Fujimori has won the presidency on her fourth attempt, reviving a political dynasty that continues to divide the country. The victory is another indication that Latin American nations appear to be shifting to the right. Conservative Fujimori, who is 51, narrowly defeated a leftist opponent in one of the closest elections in Peru's modern history, winning a razor-thin June runoff that took weeks to determine. The new president, Fujimori, says her country is on the cusp of positive change.
I believe new times are coming. There are new winds in Latin America, and that is very positive. I believe that in the countries going through electoral processes, citizens have shown they're searching for progress, for strengthening freedom and strengthening democracy.
Now, Fujimori's victory marks an accelerating rightward shift rippling across Latin America. US President Donald Trump has been pushing an initiative he calls the Shield of the Americas, bringing together right-wing governments that follow the tough-on-crime policies. Looking at a map of South America, we see right-leaning governments now overwhelmingly dominate the continent, with Peru the latest to join them. Colombia has just shifted to the right, with Trump-endorsed lawyer Alberto de la Espriella winning last week's runoff presidential election. Chile voted Jose Antonio Cast, a conservative and devout Catholic, as president last December. And one of Trump's allies in the region is Argentina, with populist leader President Javier Milei at the helm as well. So then let's get more on this from Dan Collyns, a journalist and filmmaker in Peru's capital, Lima. Good to see you, Dan. Fujimori's victory comes at a time, as we've pointed out, of a broader resurgence of conservative and right-wing forces across Latin America. Is this Peru result part of a regional trend, or can this result be taken, seen and weighed in isolation?
Hello, Anthony. Well, thank you very much for that question. I think it's a very good one. I think the answer is really both. I think on the one hand, yes, this does respond to a broader push to the right in Latin America. As you mentioned, some of those leaders who consider themselves to be allies of Donald Trump. And as you mentioned, Abelardo de la Espriella, who has looks set to be Colombia's next president in a second round vote very recently. And also we're looking ahead to an election in Brazil with Lula da Silva running again and later on in the year against the son of the former president Jair Bolsonaro, Flavio Bolsonaro, who obviously is also a far right candidate. And a couple you forgot to mention there, because the list is quite long. You've also got Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, firm allies of Donald Trump of the United States. And of course, Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, who likes to call himself the coolest dictator, obviously slightly sarcastically. But I think what we're looking at here in Peru is, yes, this is a part of that. And we have seen Keiko Fujimori, in fact, she's posted videos of herself talking to Abelardo de Espriella in Colombia, congratulating each other on their victories. So clearly she feels she's part of a broader push, and she's clearly feels like she is going to build stronger ties with the United States and also with right-wing leaders in the region. But she's not an outsider. She hasn't come from nowhere. This is her fourth presidential bid. It's worth pointing out that she's had 3 previous failed bids in 2011, 2016, and 2021. And in this election looks very much like some of the last elections in which there was a very, very narrow victory for one candidate over the other in the second round. And here we've seen that Keiko Fujimori, with 98.86% of the vote counted, does have an unbeatable lead, but it's only by around 43,000 votes. And in 2001, the tables were turned, and she was losing by just a few thousand votes in that election. So, and that also goes for the previous 2 elections previous to that in 2016 and 2011. So what you do have in Peru is a pro-Fujimori and an anti-Fujimori vote, which has been represented basically throughout the 21st century. And finally, Keiko Fujimori, who is possibly the best known politician in Peru. She's been in politics at the age of 51 now, since she became her father's first lady at the age of 19, when her parents became estranged in the 1990s. Now, her father was Alberto Fujimori, an authoritarian leader who governed Peru in the 1990s. He was later jailed for human rights abuses and corruption, and he died in 2024 after serving 16 years in prison. He was only pardoned just about a year before he passed away. So she is basically, her candidature has much to do with his legacy, both from his supporters who consider that he put the economy back on track and that he defeated the rebel Shining Path movement, and also the detractors of his government who have strongly come out against Keiko Fujimori. But she will be governing a very divided country. As we've mentioned, it's a very, very tight vote and a very narrow victory.
Dan, I want to come back to her lineage in just a moment. We've seen voters in several Latin American countries turn to candidates, as you really eloquently laid out just how many there are. These countries turning to candidates promising, in particular, order, security and strong leadership, looking for that through line now. What's Peru's situation in this regard? Why has security become such an important issue?
Well, that's a great question, Anthony. I mean, security has become a major issue across the region. Now, it's been known among analysts for some time now that Latin America is the most violent continent in the world, without having any wars currently. But it has got worse. And Peru is an example of how much it's got worse. But not just Peru. You've also seen countries which have had in the past very low crime rates, for example, neighboring Chile, which has seen a huge spike in terms of crime, be it extortion, robberies, violent crime, and even murder. So that was a very important ingredient in why Antonio Cast became elected in Chile. And I think we've seen a similar situation in other countries. For example, Ecuador, which has seen a huge spike in crime, with the homicide rate in Ecuador more than quadrupling. In fact, that's 8 times higher since 2019 than it was in 2019. Now, the situation is not quite as grave in Peru. Peru is a major producer of coca, which is the raw ingredient for cocaine. It's well inserted into that illicit economy. But we have also seen a rise in transnational organized crime across the region. In Peru, homicides have doubled since 2019. And you see also a massive rise in extortion, quite low-level extortion, where you see shopkeepers, you see people who have small businesses, for example, transport companies, bus drivers, being extorted, being forced to pay even very small amounts of money, or face being murdered. And we've seen a big rise in terms of bus drivers particularly being targeted. And also you have police forces who are really unprepared to deal with this complex criminal cartels. As I mentioned, transnational organized crime is a bit more difficult to deal with than traditional, if you like, street crime. So this is also linked to a rise in drug trafficking, and also particularly in the region, illegal gold mining. We've seen gold prices go through the roof recently, and that has also contributed to the situation. So yes, people on the street are asking for order. They're asking for what you call in mano dura in Latin America, which is an iron fist against crime, and they're sick and tired of it, and they want it dealt with by any means necessary.
Dan, Fujimori's victory and the margin of victory in particular, very narrow, as you said earlier. What does it tell us, if anything, about the state of Peruvian society and politics at the moment?
Well, it tells us that this is a highly divided society. And what we've seen, if you look at the electoral map of the country, is almost identical in 2026 to what it was in 2021, and almost also in 2016, where you see a big divide between people who voted for Keiko Fujimori largely in Lima and in the urban areas, mostly along the coast of Peru. Whereas if you've seen in the southern region of the country, in the Andes and down the Andean Cordillera, you've seen almost entirely a vote for her rival, the leftist candidate Roberto Sanchez. So what that reflects is really that Peru is still a very unequal society. You still have many people who feel like they're excluded from the economic boom which is taking place in the country at the moment. And those people particularly voted for Roberto Sanchez. So you've got a very divided country. You have a candidate, soon to be President Keiko Fujimori, who is a deeply divisive political figure because of her father's legacy, but also because of her own political conduct over 2 decades. And it's going to be a difficult country to govern because clearly there are still deep divisions between the urban and rural areas.
Dan, you talk about it being difficult to govern and she's got a razor-thin margin. What are Fujimori's main policies? How are we going to judge success here? What were the 3 big promises, if you like, and goals as she sets out on this term?
Well, first and foremost, it was order. And what she means, I think, by order is probably tougher security. And as I mentioned before, like the mano dura or iron-fisted approach to crime, which has not always been successful. Now, her supporters and her father's supporters credit him with crushing a communist rebel movement, the Shining Path, which was particularly bloody in the 1980s and in his government in the 1990s. Now, that also came at a cost. There were grave human rights violations committed by the state. And of course, he was subsequently jailed for human rights violations, including authorizing death squads. There are her detractors, Keiko Fujimori's detractors, who fear that could mean a return to giving a carte blanche to the security forces, impunity for police and police killings, and a more authoritarian kind of government in Peru, which many consider, or at least her detractors consider, has found it hard to win back democracy in the 21st century. So that is a policy which I think has found her favor, and also there are definitely detractors. Also, she's going to stick to Peru's market economy. That's been a major issue in this election. Peru has a successful economy at the moment, despite the political chaos of the last 10 years, which has seen Keiko Fujimori will be the 9th president in a decade, and she's going to be the first president to have been elected in the last 5 years. That is also a divisive issue. People feared that the leftist candidate would interfere with the market economy, even though he pledged that he wouldn't do. And there are concerns that interference could lead to a decline in the economic growth. She said that the economic growth is currently about 3.4%, which is stable and strong for the region, and very much relying on the high prices of commodities like copper and gold. It is going to continue, and that I think is at least for middle class and upper class Peruvians and the business class, she's been their candidate for that reason. But there are also concerns about her democratic credentials and the fact that she is not just arriving at power now, but she has had a strong party which has in the past had a very strong hand in the country's parliament, and through corruption and other means controls much of the Congress, will control the bicameral Congress in the future, and also has a significant amount of control in the judiciary and the prosecutor's office as well. Right. Even the Human Rights Ombudsman is seen to be under the control of her party. So that critics fear could mean a more authoritarian government in the future.
Yeah, as they try and break that extraordinary run of 9 presidents in 10 years, Dan, part of Fujimori's outlook, she's signalled closer ties with Washington. How might a Fujimori presidency alter Peru's foreign policy, particularly at a time of growing Chinese influence in Latin America?
That's a good question, Anthony. And we've seen in Peru and other countries in the region that the US is trying to have a much stronger presence in this second Donald Trump presidency. Now, we've seen that particularly in Peru, where China has already a strong presence. It's the number one trading partner in Peru, but it's also the number one trading partner in most countries in the region. It's also the biggest provider of FDI, foreign direct investment, in the country. And it's got some not just big investments in mining, but also major investments in infrastructure, including a port called Chancay, which is just north of Lima, and it has a direct, if you like, express link to Shanghai in China. And that has been a cause for some concern for the US government, which have said that this is the government of, or the current governments of Peru. There have been a number of changes of presidents, as we discussed. It is favoring China over US investment, and they want that to be rectified. And Keiko Fujimori has promised closer ties to the US. So that, of course, I think will be definitely something that Donald Trump will look upon favorably. But in actual fact, what you do have in Peru is quite a broad portfolio of investment, both from the United States and China. China is ahead, but I think overall, there isn't the kind of imbalance that you're looking at in other countries in Latin America, perhaps neighbors like Bolivia or Ecuador, where you see perhaps an imbalance level of influence from the Chinese government.
Journalist and filmmaker Dan Collyns, it's been a pleasure getting some real insight from a source and a strong voice on the ground there in Lima. Thanks for the chat. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for talking to me.
So a big thanks to Dan Collyns. Big thanks to you for being part of the conversation. You take part in the comments below. From Berlin, it's bye for now.